Batu, Marana, Nikto. You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Fighting the alien hordes valiantly one by one. How about you?
Yes, I'm all good. Yeah. I was worried, but the monsters only come at night mostly, so it's all good. Yes, we are going to be talking about the sequel to Alien, which we discussed last week, Aliens, James Cameron's Aliens from 1986. As always, starring Sigourney Weaver, Michael Biehn as Corporal Hicks, Carrie Henn as Newt, Paul Reiser as Burke, Lance Hendrickson, Bill Paxton, William Hope as Lieutenant Gorman, Jeanette Goldstein as Vasquez, and it goes on and on and on. There's lots of quite a large cast, at least for the most part. This is set 56 years after the events of Alien, and the ship, the escape pod that Ripley was in, is found by a salvage crew, but she is found to be alive and returned to a company satellite or space station, which it never gets named, but we see that it's called the Weyland-Yutani Company. I think this is the first time it gets named as such. And she reports everything that happened in the first film. No one kind of believes her, despite the fact she blew up this massive mining, this ship and all its sort of cargo. And then she sort of tries to reintegrate herself back with society, gets a job on a loader, and then they find out that they've lost contact with a colony that has started to live on LV-426. And so she decides to go with the Marines group that's going to investigate. And when they get there, they find that no one has survived and the alien horde has taken over. So, yes. Julian, first thoughts then. What are your first thoughts on Alien from 1986?
Well, I think that there is a lot of baggage that we bring to this film in particular. I mean, when we talked about Alien, we sort of talked about its influence and, especially in terms of sci-fi horror, its influence is profound. I think that usually when we talk about Alien, I mean, we talk about like the, obviously the rise of James Cameron, but we also talk about like this is really what defines the franchise, right?
Yes.
It's this that really, it introduces the, Colonial Marines, there's a little bit more kind of like world building here. And in the 80s, where the action movie is king, right? This turns this weird, sort of small scale horror movie into a action franchise, for better or for worse. And I think that the conventional take on this film has always been that it is a better film than the original. That they both have strengths, but that, this is usually the one. Growing up, I mean, I would hear, like Alien is okay, but Aliens is just really where it's at. And I always felt the reverse. I always felt like I liked Alien, and I felt like Aliens was so silly. And yeah, I think I'll moderate that a little here. I think one of the things that I have always resented this film for is, as it develops that franchise, it takes the entire concept of the alien, which is, one of them can destroy an entire ship, right? One gets on your ship, everybody's going to die. Doesn't matter how good your training is, maybe you'll get lucky, but basically, that's how deadly they are. And you think about how many times we see this in science fiction or fantasy, where something's built up to be the ultimate enemy, whether it's like the Borg,
The
right?
Predator. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The Predator, or yeah, I mean, you think of it like Doctor Who villains, where it's like,
Hmm.
one Dalek is the end of the world, and
Yeah.
but then you get fast forward a few serials later, and you get Daleks being mowed down like stormtroopers, and I think that's what I really resented Aliens for, is taking this thing that was so powerful and just with the scope of one movie, turn it into cannon fodder. Um, and I wanted Aliens to be scary and to preserve that original Borg-like ultimate enemy status,
Hmm.
and I felt like this film destroyed it. Now I'm going to be more charitable, this time, um, but that is kind of my baggage, and I think we all sort of bring some kind of baggage to this film, which says a lot about how influential it is.
Mm.
What's your baggage? What's your history of
My baggage.
Aliens?
Oh, when you got one podcast, that's a big question.
Well, it starts with my
Yeah.
father, doesn't it?
Yeah. No, it's a good point, and you are right. Cameron does this, and I feel this is the same. We've said this before with Cameron and Terminator. He reaches like a point early, like he takes it to almost like the inevitable too soon. Like the aliens, it stands large over the franchise. Like we will talk about the next two, but anything like from AVP and those sort of things, even in the comics, like the comics define this, or so I would say that this film defines the comics more than any other film. We get characters and situations in the sort of the Alien comics, whether it be Dark Horse or the more recent Marvel stuff, that's very much driven by the idea that you get from aliens. So I agree with what you're saying, that this is sort of like the inevitable. However, I actually watched it this time. I really watched it, and I watched the theatrical cut, and I made a decision as well. I think the theatrical cut is better than the extended cut. Because the extended cut introduces lore and things, which is stupid. Um, and this is a tighter film for the theatrical cut, but I think I like it as inevitable. You say about the first one makes it like an ultimate weapon. It's kind of, I see what you're saying, but that crew of the Nostromo is a bunch of like rig workers. They're a bunch of sort of like, this is a bunch of blue collar guys that have minimal kit. They have a couple of flamethrowers and a rinky dink motion detector, and that's kind of it. Um, so one alien wiping them out, it's like, oh my God, that's a real problem. Um, it's scary. It's done all that. It lives in the shadows. You don't get to see it. It's all that kind of stuff. If you were to do that again though, with this, we've got the same thing, but now it's like, the Marines are wiped out really quickly. I think it would fall into the slasher category of like, oh, it's Michael Myers or it's Jason or Freddy or whatever. Like we're basically setting up red shirts to be sort of, to be
Hmm.
taken out by an alien. So I appreciate that they went a different direction. And also it kind of feels inevitable for the story. We have the corporation coming in and saying like, well, actually we've advanced 56 years since this happened. And we
Hmm.
know it's clear that they know stuff. I like the fact that we've still got this weird sort of, the company clearly knows more than they're letting on, and you get that throughout this. Um,
Yeah, I have problems with that.
oh
Um,
no, I do as well. There's clarity issues needed. Um, but no, I don't know. This whole thing with the Marines and the colony and stuff, I like the fact it expands on the sort of our future. So like this colonization of other planets and all this other stuff, as well as they've clearly sent Marines out on other bug hunts. They acknowledge that there's been other alien life, but it's always been a bit of a disappointment.
mm,
Um, and so I think all this works really well. Now, this thing of aliens being cannon fodder, I do think they overdo it a bit, where like it's like an absolute tidal wave of drone aliens that are being taken out by the Marines. It shouldn't be as much as it is. It looks cool, but it still feels like there should be less of them that should be a threat. Like they should be much more resilient than I think they are shown to
Mhm.
be in this film. So I agree with you on that factor. But I think everything upping in this is brilliant. But I also think the problem is this is the same thing that Cameron does with Terminator 2, where he's like, I'm now going to take it to its maximum conclusion and
Mm.
I'm going to finish it. And then every sequel is kind of then struggling to address a balance of bringing it back into something that you can then
Right.
sequelize. Um, but no, I think I'm watching this time. I think this film is brilliant. There was a few things that sort of struck me of how much I like this film.
Well, so I mean, watching it this time, I sort of feel that I'm shocked, and I think this is how I felt when I've seen it, you know, paying less attention, in recent years, is that basically I really like the first half of the film, and I
Hmm.
really hate the second half.
Okay.
And I think this film is totally divided in half, right around the time that the aliens overrun them and
The
Newt gets
first.
lost.
Oh, okay. So
Um,
the finale, you got the third
yeah,
act kind of
yeah.
bit.
So right, really, basically, like up until maybe the beginning of the third act.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, everything's fine. I like all the drama. Yes, it is. By that point, the aliens aren't totally cannon fodder yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if the movie stopped there and they evacuated successfully, you would say, okay, this is it would already have the runtime of a movie, but you would
Yeah.
say, okay, this is a good movie. The aliens beat back the Marines. There was some duplicity with the corporation again, and this worked fine. It's that whole, it's that whole third act where
Get
she
away
goes
from her,
down.
you bitch, and
Yeah, and Newt is taken, but then the alien disappears, and I mean, there are aliens all over the place, and she,
mm.
goes into the heart, and you somehow escapes with a flamethrower, and all of it is just I'm slapping my head at how stupid it is. And then that Queen design like is okay,
Oh, and I
like I
love
kind of
that.
like it,
I've
but it's
always
but it's
adored that Queen
stupid.
design. Uh,
Yeah, but okay, so it okay, here's why I hate it, right? Like it's kind of cool to see like, oh, okay, here's what's laying all these eggs and everything. But then it just detaches this like tube that it's like very, 80s special effect. And now suddenly it's your boss battle from every video game ever, right? Like
mhm.
generally the queen is not the biggest warrior too,
No, that's
but they
fine.
need that to do their big boss. I mean,
But you like,
if she
let
just
me.
burned the queen alive and you didn't have any of that, it would be a much better movie.
Yeah.
But, you got to have the, I mean, to me,
All
all of
right.
this is just
You what
painfully
you're
sad.
saying is this. So let me. We'll get to that. No, no, because I do want to put historical context in this. You're
Okay.
saying, oh, it's just like every boss battle ever. Don't forget, up until this point, that hadn't. You say about computer game, like this had not happened. This was kind of revolutionary of having this kind of like the reveal was like the alien queen is this practical as well, fully articulated practical effect created by Stan Winston Studios. Um, and having this big boss battle at the end was not so much revolutionary, but it was a step up in what they've been able to do in special effects. Like that's one of the reasons I think it
Hmm.
holds up. I think the special effects in this really hold up. I can't I understand I appreciate what you're saying because I think there's a shift in tone for that third act. And I consider it to be the Sarah Connor effect, which I will get to.
Okay.
That
We can hold off.
this is what Cameron does, but he did it. He was trying something that he will do better in a future film. Um, but you say about this first part, right? And I want to talk about the pacing of this film and how it manages to parcel out information that keeps becoming important. Like it manages to give you exposition and information and stuff without really being exposition. It kind of
Hmm.
keeps information conversational. This film happens in like half-hour blocks. So the first half
Hmm.
hour includes like Ripley being saved. It takes her to they go to the station. It's all that sort of stuff. At 35 minutes into this film, they're landing on the planet.
Hmm.
Right, so that's 35 minutes in. I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. And then you get them searching the planet and doing the bits and pieces. An hour in is them the first attack is they're in the sort of the coolant. They're finding the they're going in. They've got the sort of the buzz at the locators of all the
Yeah, they're going through the sort of like
colonists. Yeah, and that's when
alienized
that's it.
corridors. Yeah.
Yeah, and then that happens at an hour and a half is Newt and Ripley being attacked by the facehuggers in the Medibay.
Mm-hmm.
So they've really got this thing down to being like, right, every half an hour, this story is going to shift direction. Like we're going to be like, that's the next bit, shift. This is the next bit, shift. But each part is really important. Like you get information that is critical to the story for the next mini section. I thought it was really, really well done about how it sort of parcels out the information for the next story bit.
Yeah, I mean, you're basically, and I haven't looked at this, but I mean, you're basically saying like it's got a 4-act play kind of
Yes, it does.
structure.
It definitely does. 4-act structure.
And that's fascinating. I think that's great. I think that the acts get worse and worse. I mean, I think that like that. I'm amazed at how good that first act is. I do think what's missing from the director's cut of like seeing the photo of the daughter and a little bit of how those 57 years affect her, right? It's not interstellar, but it's edging in that direction. That's good stuff.
I hate that she has a
Why?
daughter. So never mentioned in the first film.
Okay. Yeah.
And in one of the first things they mention when they come out of hypersleep in the first film, one of the things that Dallas says to them all pretty quickly is, this is going to extend our journey by 10 months.
Mm-hmm.
And at no point does Ripley go,
yeah,
oh, shit, I'm going to miss my daughter's birthday. I've got family, blah, 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 blah. Like, that never is a consideration. So for her to that, and I know they were trying to introduce this thing about the mother figure, like Ripley becoming the mother figure. But I'm fine without knowing she had a daughter. Like, it feels too much. It's one of those things. I know in that extended edition where like, I think her name's Alice or something. Because what's hilarious is that becomes lore, and in the extended universe novels, like that daughter becomes a character and does stuff. So yeah, I don't know. It just to me it's a bit like, oh, so you didn't give a shit 57 years ago about that, but now it's a problem. Okay, well that feels weird. So I hate that. I really do. I've never liked that bit of lore that comes into it from the extended edition. So,
that's totally fair. Amanda is her name.
Amanda, thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and she is the protagonist of that Alien animated movie we'll talk about on the Patreon. No, so that's all completely fair. I accept everything you're saying. You are not wrong. And one of the problems with Alien is like I'm familiar with the canon, but I'm at that sort of like stage where it's like I know the canon, but I start forgetting where stuff first appears.
Yeah.
Where it's like when you're reading the Bible and you're like, right, okay, here's Satan in the garden. No, that's a snake. You're conflating stuff. Yeah. So I sort of have that where I've studied it, but not studied it enough to kind of know that stuff. So I appreciate that corrective. And you're right. I mean, that it's not there in the first film. And it doesn't make sense that it's not there.
And it doesn't affect Ripley's response to Newt becoming a mother figure. Like, it doesn't affect that in the slightest. Her response to this lost child that's lost her family and Ripley falling into that position. We don't know enough about Ripley's past to not know that that's the case, but like it feels fine. Like, she's the non-militaristic person of the group, so I'm kind of like, yeah, that feels fine. I'm fine with that she's become this sort of like she's become attached to this lost child. It could just be in the heat of the moment she's fulfilling this mother role, but
that's fair.
Yeah.
What is interesting to me is it's very clear that it's this film that has the motherhood / impregnation.
More so than that first film.
The first one doesn't have it, period.
Yeah.
I mean, the first one that's a scary Alien is a horror movie, right? And you could write an academic paper about how it's really, about menstruation and pregnancy and all this stuff, but that would really be a theory, right? It's not really supported by the text. This one is Cameron going, right, that's an analog for pregnancy.
Yeah.
Your body's not controlled by you. That child is going to come out, even if it kills you. And obviously, so, that's interwoven with with nudes and, Amanda's photo and stuff, which you're right. We don't really need. The theme is there anyway. But I think it's funny because we associate that theme with the Alien franchise completely, and it's not. It's just not there in the first one. It's this, right?
And it comes down to
and I
two
like
mothers.
That theme.
No, I like it as well. Like the idea is it's two mothers at the end fighting over, their children and that sort of. I know, yeah.
Again, I think it goes too far, right?
Agreed.
Like,
I accept what you're saying. But anyway, this opening section, I agree. I love this opening section of Ripley being interviewed and her getting frustrated with the corporation. She's like, "Did IQs drop suddenly whilst I've been out? People are going over it again and again." And then as you learn more information, again, I think it's sort of highlighted more in the extended cut and in the novelization, which I have read before. That like it's about 6 months. Like that first half hour is not like it feels a little bit shorter, but you learn more. Like she gets a job. She's lost her license to be a navigator, so she has to become a loader. So she's working on the loading docks and she's doing this other stuff. But like, they cut her hair shorter and they do this other stuff. But she's still having monthly psych evaluations and she's being, reviewed and assessed by the corporation on a regular basis. I love all that. She's trying to get her life back together, but she's still she's haunted by it all. She's got PTSD. She's traumatized
not
by it all.
sleeping. Yeah. And, it does need to do a better job of communicating the time that passes.
Yes.
But one of the things that I love most about it, I like, okay, so she's traumatized. I wish that I don't buy that, the corporation doesn't believe her, right? Because obviously it knew about the alien, and this is where it kind of falls apart. You could explain that, but the movie's not interested in doing so. And so, that annoys me ultimately. But one of the things that I really like about this is that I'm so sick of, I hate coincidences, but even more than that, I hate, plot conveniences. And, when they draft her back in and say, look, there's been an incident, you later find out that that's not a coincidence at all, right? What's his name? The slime ball. Burke has ordered them to investigate, logically enough, site of an alien ship on the planet they're on, and that led to this infestation. So, ironically, Ripley being saved is what
triggers it.
Set the whole catalyst. It was the catalyst for all of this.
Yeah, and I love that. I do like that. Yeah.
Right. It's not like, oh, coincidentally, there was another alien attack 57 years later, right after we got you out of stasis. No. It's all a direct consequence from.
This is why I like him as a calculating character. Like, he's a baddie. Like, he's a really good. Paul Reiser plays a good slime ball. Like, I've seen him do other things. But you can see.
He should have stayed a slime ball. Because he is such an. Forget Mad About You. He needs to just stay the slime ball, right?
Yeah.
He needs to stay Walter White and not do the sitcom,
Stay the baddie. But I love the fact that it's one of those films that when you think back on it, or when you know this information and you watch it back, you realize that he keeps inserting himself into this because he's always like, how can I profit from this? Like, this isn't, he plays it like he's being the nice guy, but he's always calculating where's the percentage in it for me? Like, where's the profit? And you realize that obviously as the film progresses. But he's friendly enough and it's all this other stuff. But you see it that he's in that meeting, and I can see that he's thinking because he's looking around the room. He's sat there looking at everybody else, going like, "Oh, I wonder if anyone else has had the same idea as me." So, yeah,
he is played as a real slime ball. I don't think that outside of obviously sabotaging the crew, later on in the film, I don't think that he's that awful though.
No, he's not. He's not evil. He's just a corporate stooge, isn't he?
Yeah, and he is slimy in that sense of like obviously trying to get ahead and doesn't care about anyone else. But it's logical to investigate these claims of a crashed alien ship, on a planet that you have a
It is,
facility on.
but you have a
Okay,
responsibility to do it properly. That's the
right. Yeah, but I mean, if you don't believe her, you said, recon this,
mm.
right? And they decided to go inside or something. I mean,
So
I'm not invested in redeeming.
I have called
This
out
is
I have called out Mike on the Comics in Motion Star Wars in comics in canon for this on several occasions
mm,
where he's gone on. But in the comics, there's this other thing that explains this.
okay,
So, I've called up, but I'm going to do it.
but you're gonna pull one
But
of
I'm going
them.
to do it now, and that's why I apologize to Mike. Um, there is a comic called Newt's Tale, which is released from
Yes.
Dark Horse, and it does give her story of her side of things. It's not a bad comic. It's not great. It's very sort of middle of the road, really. It's fine. But it explains it actually, and again, this is where you say about the coincidences that kind of bother me. It turns out that it was her family that investigated because they wanted to make a claim on the spaceship, and it was her father was the one that got attacked by a face hugger and brought it all back. So um, that is interesting that they said that because it does connect to that film, and the comic does
Mm,
reference the fact that they were instructed to go out and do it, and he volunteered to do it. But the fact it's Newt's family kind of is a bit too
on the
close to
nose.
home. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like sins of the father. You
Yes.
know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, I do like this plot element. I do wish that they showed more like 6 months, right? I mean,
Yes.
you kind of get that sense by the end that she's tired. There's that reference to the psych evals and stuff.
Mm.
It should do a better job of portraying the passage of time, but good stuff. And again,
Mm.
especially knowing the later reveal, it's all done really well. I do have the problem with how do they not believe her when clearly they sent her they on this mission to be sacrificed in the first one? But that's a
Well, yeah, but who?
wider issue.
But there's a wider issue. There's an
Yeah,
issue there of, well, if it went wrong, what records were kept and what was deleted and all that kind of stuff. Like, there's a
that's true.
conspiracy suggested. Um,
57 years later, I mean,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, there's room there. You're right. I mean, there's room there to sort of not be. I'm irritated by it, but I just want there to be an answer. I don't want this movie to give us all those answers, right?
Yes.
I,
No,
I think
I
a
agree.
little gesture in that direction would be like, I mean, just like I I can't get into all the files, but something
There's
like that.
gaps. She does her own research.
Yeah,
There's gaps in the records, that sort of thing.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But then they do come back. Burke comes back with Lieutenant Gorman, and they highlight that they've lost contact with the colonists on LB 426. Um, and is it LB 426 or LB 427? I can't remember. Anyway, on the planet anyway. Um, and again, there's this sort of like you'll be completely safe. You're just there as as a consultation. Da, da, da. And I like the fact she says no, and it's sort of her deciding to face her trauma that
Mm.
just pushes her to go. Um, so that all works. That's all good for me. We are then introduced to the Sulaco and the Marine unit of the Sulaco. Much in a similar way to the Alien. Now they've obviously increased the technology. I like the fact that it's not increased massively. Like we're not going to be like, we've traveled. It's still 57 years, still doing hypersleep, slightly different setup. What are your thoughts on the Marines and the way that they sort of are portrayed and the way they work together?
I think it kind of works. I think it works fine. I mean,
Mm.
it's this very portrayal of macho culture, and I think this is one thing that Cameron he does well, but he's a little weak at. Right?
Mm.
Like he loves this kind of like macho culture. You see it in the Avatar films. I mean, he does here. It's a string of cliches, right? I mean, but I do like there's stuff that deviates from that. I mean, I do like the fact that the women shower with the men and it's not a big
Hmm.
deal, right? I mean, um, obviously, as we talk about, you know, uh, trans rights and how to integrate. One obvious solution is not having gendered anything, and that seems to be the solution here. And much like the Romans were, they're fine with it, right? I think that was something that was, when I saw this as a young boy shy about girls, this was quite a shock to me, but made sense. I admired it. So there are things that I think break that mold. Some of the dialogue, you definitely see the dialogue in this film is not up to the par of the first one, although delivered well, right?
Yes. There is something about this. I agree. So the way I thought about it is macho without being misogynistic.
Mm-hmm.
Like you say, like, you have like Vasquez, Pharaoh, Dietrich are all like females, but it's irrelevant. They're not called. There's and I like the fact there's some great jokes when like Hudson calls out Vasquez and such. She's like, hey Vasquez, have you ever been mistaken for a man? And she's like, no, have you? Like it feels, the banter sort of feels like dialogue, but I like it. Like it feels kind of that right level of macho. Um, the two behind the scene things that I kind of like about this as well is they spent a lot of time together. So before the film started, they did a boot camp so they could get used to using sort of like military hardware, all the usual things, how to run, how to move. And they introduced, instead of using like M16 rifles, they trained with pulse rifles so they could get used to the weight and the stuff, where they'd hold them and all this other stuff. Then you have like Drake and Vasquez with like the heavy artillery that's got the hydraulics and stuff on it. I think that's really cool. So to know that they spent time together, I think it shows that they spent time together as a unit to get to know each other. And I think that really works. Like, that like the guy who plays Apone, what's his name? Al Matthews. Like he feels like he's in charge, and he sort of when they did the working together, they had him as the sergeant, like he was trying to keep them in control. The other thing they did is they gave them their costumes before filming started, and they did some of this training in it, and they said decorate it. Just like, so like, this is what, these soldiers in Vietnam would sort of have like the peace sign on their helmet and or this and that things. So everything that you see on that is not the costume department. The costume department just issued them with the Marines kit, and they were like, do whatever the hell you want with it. What do you think Hudson would do? What would Hicks do with it? What would Apone do with it? So all that is like them. So I think it feels personal. I do think that
Lived in.
brings it feels lived in. It feels
It's got some of
authentic.
that Mad Max quality, right? Where
Yeah,
it's like, yeah,
it feels
you
authentic. And there's little like, as we said with Mad Max, there's like little bits that you watch and you go, oh, that's cool. They've got this little like that's on their helmet, or they've got that drawn on their breastplate and that sort of thing. So all that stuff I think is a really cool, and I think adds to it. So sorry, I was going to say that's what I was thrown in. I actually kind of like them as a unit.
No, I think that's fair, and I think that, yeah, I forget what that helmet reads. It felt a little on the nose to me, but no, I definitely do appreciate that. I think that, what I don't know, what I object to is, like you're saying, like it feels like dialogue. It does feel like dialogue. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I see the work here. I mean, I think especially the loader scene,
Yeah.
where, she's like, I could do that. I'm qualified. And then she straps in and does it. And obviously that's the gun on the
Information for
wall for
later.
the third act, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But, or in this case, the fourth act. But yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like, women can do this too. Don't underestimate her because, well, I guess a civilian can do this too, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have problems with that loader design, especially in the fight.
Yeah.
But
But as a practical
but it's
loader,
it's kind of fine here.
it's a cool design. I think it's a great looking design. I should say, if you've ever then seen Avatar,
Hmm.
like
Oh yeah,
they haven't moved past this design a great deal. Um,
yeah.
but no, yeah, I know what you mean. That scene where she's like, well, I'm qualified as a loader, and then she turns up, she straps in, she's carrying, she's like, where do you want it? And Apon's like, anywhere, please. Like it all fits. Yeah,
Mm.
it's good fun. I
It's a
think
little clunky,
it is.
just a little.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's bad.
No, no. I think it gets better though. And I think the Marine stuff gets better. And we talked about this a little bit we talked about in the last film, how they spoke over each other. You know,
Mhm.
it's sort of they gave it that naturalistic thing by them talking over each other. But it was also a bit of a problem because you lost information because they were talking over each other. One of the things I like about this is they give you information and stuff from the Marines, and there's stuff coming through, but it's done over the microphone. Like it's done over them exchanging information. So you'll probably be with like Gorman, or you'll be with one of them, and they'll be checking in and talking and that sort of thing. So there's stuff given whilst they're actually active, and it doesn't cut scene. Which it could have done. It could cut between them to be saying stuff, but it doesn't.
Mhm.
Like you're going to get it in the same way that they get it. You're going to get it through the headset, and it's going to have that crackles. And I actually really like that.
Yeah, I think that I sort of have a mixed view. I like what you're saying, and I
Mm,
think what you're saying is correct. And I think this movie is really good at how it rolls out information
mm,
overall, right? And it has a number of kind of reveals that are very logical and, you know, come as you say, at good points in the film. Um, so I think all of the way that it conveys information is good. But I think especially coming off of that first film, the not exactly clunkiness, but like the way they don't talk over each other
yeah,
is, and some of the dialogue, it just kind of feels like dialogue, right? And its artificiality is enhanced having just seen that first one,
hmm
where I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm okay with this. I'm glad that I can hear all the dialogue, but it does feel a little stage playish at times.
I agree with that. I'd agree with that. Like it feels there's a polish to it, isn't there? That you feel that polish of like someone waiting for someone to finish a sentence for someone to say the next piece, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I can see the script in my head as they're speaking, right? Which,
Oh, I can quote scenes from this, like, and I haven't
mhm.
watched it that much probably in the last couple of years. And there's certain Apone in particular. I love Apone. I think he's such a cool, like the sergeant. But I can quote he's like, um, arseholes and elbows, everybody, like stuff like this. It's so sort of like cliched sergeant dialogue. Um, but I love it. I do think he's a great character. Um, One thing I do like about this group, though, again, we talk about sort of the characterization. And I want to talk about the characterization of Ripley up until this point. So we get to the first hour, right?
Mm,
We introduce the Marines. It's quite a large group. I mean, it's a group of like let's say I don't know, I couldn't name them all, 8 to 10 people. You are told quite quickly who the important ones are. Like
mhm.
here's Hicks, here's Hudson, here's Vasquez, here's Drake. Like here's Apone. Like here's the ones you gotta know, right? The others, they might as well be wearing red shirts. Like you probably get to know their names because he'll shout them out, but they're irrelevant. They don't really matter. Um, but
Well, none of them really matter, right? I mean, let's
no,
be
but
clear.
it's like but
But
like
yeah,
okay, these ones are going to last the longest. Like you need to know that
right.
you'll get to know them.
Vasquez has personality, right?
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
and it's coincidentally going to survive,
Yeah, and I like that personality and how
right?
it plays out in the film. And sort of like Hudson in particular, I think Bill Paxton is really good in this film. Like he's intentionally obnoxious and he's good at
Hmm.
doing it. Um, but I really like him that when they're on the ship and it's like it's another bug hunt and it's sort of like how do I get out of this chicken shit outfit? And he's sort of like he thinks he's the funny one. Like he's the smart mouth. He thinks he's all he thinks he's like everyone's laughing with him when they're actually laughing at him, that sort of thing, which is evidenced more so when it's him that Bishop puts his hand over and does the knife trick. Like they like to see Hudson panic. Like you get to see that he's a bit of a
Oh
dick.
yeah,
He's a bit of a coward. Like,
right.
he's all mouth, no trousers. Um
God,
yeah.
terrible expression. I've never heard it before.
um but I like how that plays out. Like once it starts to
Yeah.
go wrong and he realizes that he's not this, he might be a Marine, but like something's going to kick their ass. Like he turns to jelly, and I love that. Like
Hmm.
that's his thing. Like, and he constantly keeps getting called out for it.
No,
Um,
and it's cool. It's cool that there's a guy like that, right? I mean,
mm,
that they're not just portrayed as, because as just tough guys, right? It's not just commando, right?
mm. But they fuck up as well. you know, this
Hmm.
is the thing about this Marine unit. Like, one of the things is in that scene where they're going in to get the colonize. I keep saying the coloniers, I don't, the people, the colonists. There you go. I
Yeah,
keep saying
yeah.
cars. And again, this is what I want to come to. We'll come back. I want to circle back to Ripley and the amount of knowledge she seems to have about modern technology. But she mentions that they're under a cooling unit, and they've already mentioned that it's a huge fusion reactor. And she's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. If they open fire in there and they damage the cooling unit, like this thing's gonna blow. And you know, Burke's like, yeah, that's a real problem. Like you can't open fire in there. And of
Right.
course, like so he tells them because he's a weak leader. He tells them to pull in the things without actually telling them why. But they do open fire, and of course Drake and Vasquez have got their heavy artillery and do open fire, and then of course it does result in exactly what they say it's going to do. It damages the coolant system, which results in the venting, the emergency venting, which is pointed out later, which is results in the explosion at the end of the film.
Does it?
Yeah,
I'm not clear on that.
it's
So
exactly what this. Yeah, this is the film I really watched because I've known that before, but I was like, I'm going to follow that through. That attack by the aliens and when
I
they open
wondered that.
fire is a direct cause of the explosion. So that
Okay.
ventilation, that venting that comes later. That's why Hicks goes. You know, that's why Hicks looks so pissed off when it comes to it because he's like, okay, we got real problems. Like this
You're
is.
really making me hate this movie, man.
Mm,
Okay, so like you're right. Why is Ripley the one to point this out? I mean,
yes, that's always been a
so
problem for me.
you say like you like that they kind of are a little incompetent, right? Like, yeah,
Mm,
no, I mean, I'll say like I like that Paxton is, crumples under pressure, right? And they're not all just some cliched, tough guy unit. But I don't like that they are so unprofessional at times.
mm.
And, I mean, it makes me think, well, maybe they've just been hunting, bugs, whatever the hell that means. I mean, they have not been up against a
They
serious
haven't.
challenge.
They haven't.
But, I mean, and again, look, I know there's tons of stories of the Colonial Marines. I mean, that was a whole dark horse subline,
Hmm.
um, for years. But, but it's sort of like it wants to have its cake and eat it too. And this is very typical of this film in general. That like it wants them to be tough guys and to get all that marine stuff in and be tough guys when they need them to be tough guys, but it also wants them to be incompetent when the plot wants them to be incompetent.
See,
And so like look, I mean if your job is to go into a place that has a nuclear exposed, nuclear reactor, you should maybe know that ahead of time. Why does Ripley have to point that out? Why do they then not obey orders? I know, he
they don't
doesn't
respect
explain
Gorman.
why,
Mm.
but why would he not say that? I mean, um, this is a bit of a mess, and I
Well,
and I don't know that it's communicated that is the reactor. That is why it's venting because it's
it's.
only after the ship crashes,
Mm.
at the end that you see the venting and they say, oh, and I found myself wondering, like, is that from the crash or is that from the earlier firing?
It's a firefight.
You know,
It is. It's from the
okay.
firefight.
So how did you not notice that until coincidentally right after the ship crashed? There's a line of
No,
dialogue
because
where
they
I
didn't give
thought,
it. No,
well,
because they didn't give a shit. No, so this is the thing. So let's
this is a
characterize them.
mess, man.
No, it's not. I'll
This is a
argue.
mess.
No, it's to characterize the Marines. So I think what you're saying is, oh, Cameron wants to have his cake and eat it. I would kind of disagree. This isn't Michael Bay. This isn't Michael Bay going like the Marines are cool, man. This is
Yeah.
like this is Cameron's kind of pointing out they're a bunch of douchebags. Like this is exactly the same as Alien, where Ripley's going like, "This is dangerous." Like she's the one that gets
Mhm.
frustrated with them. She says, "One of these things ripped through my crew in less than 24 hours. Stop being dickheads."
Right. And they're
And it's
like, well,
quite
no, we're mission more
we're
Marines, right?
Marines. Like
Right.
the machoism isn't isn't a glorified. It's you got to take it as like, no, these are a bunch of meatheads. The dialogue, like the fact that like Vasquez comes out of hypersleep and they start doing pull-ups and they start doing this other stuff. Like It's all
Yeah.
macho bullshit. Like they're all as bad as each other. So when they go in, you're exactly right. The three stories that they give, right, when they talk about the stuff they've done previously, is landings with
Hmm.
nothing's happened, or they've
Hmm.
slept with colonists, or it's been like an away mission. Like they've never
That's
come up
true.
against anything. The
Right.
information that you're given is they've never come up against anything. They refer to it as a bug hunt, and they get bored. They are all frustrated and bored because they've been deployed
Hmm.
several times, and they've come across like what. I don't know, some tribbles. They've battled
Yeah.
tribbles at some point. Like they keep thinking they're going to turn up and be like, there's nothing there. We're going to get laid with a bunch of colonists and then we're going to leave heroes. We're happy with that because we look ace. We look like a bunch of badasses, right? So what happens in that firefight is when all of a sudden it goes to shit and they're like, what are we supposed to use? Harsh language? Even Hicks, like, they take the ammo out of the pulse rifles. Hicks instantly pulls out a shotgun. He's like, I like this for close
Oh yeah.
range. They're all full of it. They're all full of it. These Marines are as close to Starship Troopers. It's no look, it's no
Oh no, I definitely feel the Starship Troopers vibe.
yeah, it's there's no surprise that the Starship Troopers design from Verhoeven looks like the way it does.
Okay, I mean you're right, and I accept all of your points. I think you're right. Your characterization of them is sort of meatheads who haven't, that's right. I accept that, and that is, that is there in the film. It
Mm,
is characterized. I mean, I don't know. I guess, I've had these discussions recently, and some of this is about just the expectations that I have, especially when it comes to the military and
mm,
depictions of the military. Um, and one of the things that I've realized in recent years is that, especially post Vietnam, post Panama, where we fuck shit up badly, um, post first Iraq War, where there was a
mm,
lot of civilian problems. Um, we the United States military has become like a fighting machine that follows orders.
mm,
And when I see other militaries around the world, I'm like, yeah, those Israelis are not well trained. They're simply not.
mm.
Um, whereas Americans are just like, yeah, that bullet was past my head, but yeah, it's not close enough to fire back yet. I mean, like those American
Discipline.
soldiers are like phenomenally well trained
Oh no,
and
100%.
have phenomenal discipline.
Right.
And so I don't expect that, but I mean there is a level of competence that this is almost like the corporate version of like, what if OCP had its
Yeah, no, it is 100%.
own
These aren't.
military,
This is not
and they
military.
kind of have the trappings of the military, but they
Yes,
have no
yes. Right.
competence.
This is there's two things to cover which you have put right. So post Vietnam, and I'd actually say post Rambo.
Hmm.
Any form of military come in two forms in action movies. Okay,
Yeah.
either hugely incompetent, apart from your lead character,
Hmm.
or a brave fighting force that lay down their lives for the greater good. Okay, that's the two kind of action forms you're going to get right up into the present day. Like you will
Hmm.
look at like anything that is based on realistic military history, right? Michael Bay's done a couple of these. There was one called 12 Strong with Hemsworth in, Black Hawk Down. All those kinds of films will have that thing where even during a fuck up, people are trying to do
Hmm.
the best thing they can. There's always those kinds of things, right? In other scenarios, the military are completely incompetent apart from their one hero, right? That's just the way action movies have gone. But we keep talking about these as if they are the military. They are not the military. This has always been a bit of a problem with this thing because the law says they are Colonial Marines that work for Weyland-Yutani.
Do they? Is that?
Yes. Well, they're not government.
Yeah.
They're being deployed by Weyland-Yutani. They are Colonial Marines. They are part of the colonist organization. And again, the law is unclear in this because
Yeah.
some comics have them as part of and books have them as part of the government, but the government's never talked about.
They do
Others
kind of allude to the government in this a few times, like because Burke says like there's something about like how well sneaking the his
getting
plan is to
through,
sneak the get
yeah,
it through customs,
customs.
So I sort of thought that the Colonial Marines were government in this.
I've never taken them. I've always assumed they worked for Weyland-Yutani, and that's why Burke is able to sort of like, he's an attachment, but then, what, we've lost colonists. Well, all right, but because the thing that's clear from this film is this colony is not like a government outreach. Do you know what I mean? Like this isn't this isn't an American government or a United Federation government saying we're going to go set up a colony out there. This is a Weyland-Yutani installation. These are Weyland-Yutani colonist employees. They were volunteer families for Weyland-Yutani. No, I think these are almost verging on mercenaries.
Yeah. Well, that would make a lot more sense. I mean, certainly it's a Weyland-Yutani, mining facility, right? But yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, there is this comment about the government before. I mean, they're called the Colonial Marines. I mean, I don't know. I'm not entirely,
even
like
if they are,
it's sort of vague.
Even if they are part of the government, this isn't sort of like your special forces or your SAS.
Oh yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Clearly,
like,
yeah.
And that's what's so when you're saying they're incompetent, I'm like, no, that's intentional. This is all intentional.
You're right. Yeah,
and they don't respect
proving that case.
Gorman this is his second military live action drop. He makes it clear, like he's done several simulations. This is only the second time he's been out in the field, but the first time he's been with this group. It's all like they're all sort of, this is like no one's taking this serious.
Okay, all right, fair enough. So how do you get past? I mean, the fact that they do fire guns in this supremely stupid idea of like don't well, oh wait, it takes Ripley because only Ripley's the only smart one in this group. Nobody can add 2 + 2 except Ripley. She's like, oh, you do know you're in a nuclear reactor right now. Oh, I guess we should confiscate the guns. They fire anyway. That's never mentioned again.
Yeah.
Never once mentioned again. Nobody says, I mean, it's like the most you hear is like, stop. I told them to not fire, get on the radio, that's all. But there's no consequences of it until after the spacecraft crashes. And then you say, oh, it's venting steam, it's been damaged. The implication is it's been damaged in what's just happened. If that is, in fact, if there are any consequences of firing, and that is, in fact, what caused this leak, why has nobody mentioned it for an hour?
Because they didn't know. So the thing is, so when you look at like where people are separated, right? Because this is like a bit like a disaster film in some respects. The way that they've separated people out is important. So you've got the dropship, and I also want to talk about how cool the dropship is as well. Like I used to have that as a model. I had a model of that dropship that had the wings that come out. It was ace.
That's cool.
And I think I also had the APC as well, the armored personnel carrier as well, which was really cool.
You mean the sort of like armored Batmobile sort of?
The big long sort of thing.
Cool.
I built that as a model years and years ago. It was awesome. Anyway, that's what I mean. The designs in this are just fantastic. I really like the sort of the vehicle and all this other stuff designs. But so that's there. So they have this incident, and then Ripley again. I do have problems with Ripley in this film. She becomes a little bit Mary Sue, and to the detriment of the character, because we've seen her be strong and we've seen her be intelligent. Now she just seems to know things about technology that I'm like, how the hell do you know that? That's weird. I accept she could see how to learn how to drive the APC. She does a bad job of it, so that's fine. But knowing certain things sort of bothers me. But yeah, she rams the APC there. She gets the Marines out. So most of them die. She saves the ones that we know are going to survive because we learn their names, and then she battles out into into the sort of the wilderness. So basically, they've shot that shit up, right? And so the person that's not with them that is doing so they're outside. They've got no access to this thing.
To the controls.
And so the dropship is in the thing. Ferro and Spunkmeyer are they've been loading up, ready to leave.
Mhm.
And so they get killed when that's when the ship crashes. So they've never had
Hmm.
information. So actually, it might be an hour later. No one said like they're still recovering from the fact that they've lost people. They've lost both the APC and the dropship. And so the only person that's been keeping an eye on this and who is actually the one that explains the information is Bishop, who's been in the lab. And he's the one that when they turn back up, when they get into that place and you get the as the screens come up, he's the one that's like, yeah, you know that thing that we said could happen? Yeah, it's happened.
Yeah.
It's Bishop that gives them the information. So they've been out of the game. Like they've had to sort of hike back to the thing. So even if they saw the venting, and they're all Marines, like they don't know what they're expecting to see. So my expectation is, yeah, so that's why it's Bishop that gives them the information. Now, I've had more of an issue if they got back and Ripley was like, look at the venting, this is what you've caused. Um, but I think
Yeah.
Bishop is
Why
the one.
doesn't she say that? I mean,
Well, no, but Bishop's the one that gives them information and stuff. So I'm comfortable with it because they caused the issue with that firefight. But the firefight was a lack of discipline because they are a bunch of meatheads, and no one took this mission serious until it became serious.
okay, okay. At this point, I just feel like, why is there not a line of dialogue explaining what the relationship is between the Colonial Marines and Wayland? Are they government or are they not?
Mm.
Why is there not a line of dialogue about, like, well, you know, um,
We fucked up.
why did you fire? We can't, like, you better hope, nothing was damaged. I mean, I still am going to hate the idea of, like, oh, she's the only one who knows you're not supposed to fire in there. And then apparently the result of firing is you basically start a countdown to
Hmm.
an explosion. You know, is there a radiation leak? I mean, doesn't matter because in terms of the plot, it just starts to stick the dynamite on a fuse, right? I mean,
Hmm.
this is pretty dumb. But it could be better if at least there were some of this dialogue, right? I mean, even after they find out, then she could, say, get mad at them for having fired or
Hmm.
something, that makes this kind of thing clear. Um, there's a sort of, failure to communicate basic things in this movie that it does a good job of what it does, but I don't know. There are just things like this that drive me crazy.
See, I've always sort of assumed that was the case, but when I really watched it this time, like I had the subtitles on, I was really paying attention. So I really picked up on this. So I'm fine with it. I think I'm like, oh, there's enough information there for me to know that they've just explained that, like, if you open fire and damage the coolant system, you're going to
Yeah.
cause a problem. They do it, they come back to it, they've caused a problem. So I'm kind of cool with that. The whole
And the
relationship
problem
with
is
them
a
is
stick of dynamite on a
it's a
timer.
countdown. It becomes a countdown.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's how nuclear reactors work, right? I mean,
Well, that is that. Yeah, they've got a coolant system, haven't they? If the cooling starts to fail, they start to vent to keep cool. So look, it's a space nuclear reactor. I'm not going to worry about it too much. It's space mumbo jumbo. It's space techno garble. It's fine. I'm fine with that. I'm gonna accept that. Every franchise has that kind of thing.
yeah, but the way you get away with it is, you say early on, like, if the dilithium, is destabilized, it'll do this, right? And then when that happens, they say, oh no, you better not destabilize the dilithium. And then, the next thing you find out, it is destabilized. We're now on a counter, right?
But that's what's
And
happened.
then,
But that's exactly what
but
happened.
that's none of those things happen.
It does.
None of those things
That
happen.
conversation, that exact conversation happens when I mean, it's unfortunately it's Ripley that points it out, and it should probably be Burke because he points out about how it's
Where
manufactured
is the
by
nuclear
Richter.
reactor? Do you see that in those walls?
No,
Like,
it's
you
inside.
just
It's
see.
in that they say it. They actually say it. Like he says it early on because they talk about it's an atmosphere processor, but
Mhm.
generally it's a nuclear fusion device.
It's powered by a fusion,
And he says
right?
like,
And
and
so they're
because
in the
and
corridors
yeah,
of.
and then he leads it, and then 'cause he leans in and says, "We manufacture that, like that, Wayland make that. Wayland
Yeah,
you trying to
no,
make
I
that."
like that line.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of like, and then, but anyway, later on when they're in the vehicle, and unfortunately, again, I think it's the wrong person to point out that says, oh, they're under the coolant system. So they are under the coolant system for the fuel, the nuclear
Okay.
reactor that fuels the atmosphere processor. And that's when Burke says, oh, shit, yeah. And Gorman's like, "What do you mean? What's wrong? I don't get why you're so upset." And it says, "If you rupture that coolant system, it's basically you're looking at a thermonuclear
Hmm.
countdown." And that's when Gorman says,
Right.
"Shit, I didn't know that." And he says to Apone, gather in the ammo, no firing, flamethrowers only, blah 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 blah."
Okay. Okay. So like if we say this is correct and that they all of this is correct and I agree that you sorted this out. Um, even if we say that's correct and that the film does not underline these key facts in a way that we might like for first viewing, the dialogue is there that you could figure it out, right?
Hmm.
Even if we can see that, does it not feel like it lessens the movie that the entire climax is built around a countdown because a bunch of guys walked into a reactor and just started firing even though they were told not to? I mean,
No,
doesn't
no,
this feel
no,
just kind of dumb?
no. I think it builds into exactly what the point of this film is. Again, like the whole film to me
That the Marines are stupid.
is the Marines is that Wayland Yutani cuts corners and that the Marines, were not prepared. They were the wrong um, unit to be sent to this, led
Hmm.
by an inexperienced leader. No one took this seriously. It was a bug hunt where they were supposed to be getting laid with a bunch of colonists. That, to me, like they were fully expecting to come up, find out that a transistor had broken, communications reinstalled, back off. Like that was the thing. The reason Bert comes is he's like, I know what I sent these people to investigate. I don't want to lose out on my stake. So even if there is an issue, I want to be there to say, put my stamp on it. That's mine. So no, it
I,
doesn't. It fully.
I like the version of the movie that you're selling. I just don't think that that comes off in this film.
It's the version I watched.
It's not the movie. I mean, it's the movie I watched has all those things, but they're kind of grace notes. You
Mm.
know, they're there, but I mean, they're not the through line. They're not clear enough to me. I mean, I know people who have watched, not just kids, but I mean, I know people who watch this movie and have been like, "Fuck, I joined the Colonial Marines." You know, I
Mm.
mean, and they're not people who like would watch RoboCop and say like, "Yeah, OCP are the good guys," right? I
Yeah.
mean, what I'm saying is like those elements. I mean, and I do think there's an anti-military, obviously anti-corporate. I mean, all of those elements are there. I just wish they were brought out enough that what the narrative you're describing, which I did see
Mm.
as an overall interpretation, but I saw it as one of a series of possibilities that is kind of the richer of the possibilities. Um, I wish it were underlined. I just don't think it's. I mean, you could come away from this movie and go, "Yeah, those Marines were really awesome." It sucks that they made that mistake, but they're good guys. I'd like to enlist if I could. I mean,
Oh yeah, I've
you
got
could.
no. I don't think I've liked the Colonial Marines in the sense of like I think they look cool. I like their designs. I think Michael Biehn is a massively underrated '80s actor. I've always liked him in things. Um, but to me, this film is about a bunch. Yeah, I've always thought this like that the film's about a bunch of meatheads that fuck up, and Ripley's the one going like, "You do know you've made a massive mistake, and I'm going to have to clean up your mess."
Mm, hmm.
Um, so I've
But
always
then
taken it as that.
she's like that irritates me because then she's the only competent character.
Yes. Now this is a
Um.
problem I have. Now this is what I said about the Sarah Connor problem.
Hmm.
So this is exactly what Cameron does, right? So the first film, it's the same with Terminator, right? So if you watch the Terminator film, Sarah Connor in the first film, she is the damsel in distress, okay? And I still love that first film, but she very much plays the damsel in distress with Michael Bihn's Carl Reese and Arnie being the Terminator fighting, and she becomes a little bit more competent towards the end as she learns about explosives, and she's the one that finally takes out the Terminator. Fine. We would then return to Terminator 2, and we
Hmm.
find that she's now become, you know, obviously the
A ninja.
timelines. Yeah, basically, she's become Rambo. Now, I'm fine with that in the extent of like she spent years training and she sort of like, she really focused herself on this other stuff. But the film again is a bunch of people saying like, we don't know, we don't believe you. You're clearly crazy. You've seen this, you keep talking about this vision of the future, and then these robots come in. And then we learn that Cyberdyne Systems actually has a microchip, the processor, the CPU terminal, and its arm, and is building Skynet and all this other stuff. Like, obviously, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But throughout that film, like Sarah Connor's the one going, "We should be doing this. We should be doing this." Now she's shown as being incredibly intense, and it's driven her mad. The pressure of
Hmm.
knowing the future. But again, it's Cameron showing like, no, this is a badass woman, and she's the one to follow. Like she's the savior of the future. Da da da. But in doing so, it kind of results in other people looking fucking stupid. Because
Yeah.
you're going like, okay, well, you know, no one's ever sort of, there's all this sort of the police show the two pictures of Arnie, and they're going like, he looks the same. You go, no, not really, but like this is the same dude, and you've had no instance between 84 and 94 when this film's supposed, or 96, I think the film's supposed to take place. Like it doesn't work, and I think because of that, I think the same problem happens with Ripley in this film. That all of a sudden,
Yeah.
by the end of the film, she's become Sarah Connor. She's like, oh, the Marines couldn't take these things out, but I'm going to strap a pulse rifle and a flamethrower together and take a bunch of M4
Oh,
grenades, and I'm going to go and get Newt back.
yeah. So yeah. I mean, that is. I've already said. I mean, like that is the part of the film that just for me jumps the shark. It's
Mm-hmm.
appallingly awful. Um, I mean, even to that point, and certainly that is the point at which like you can kind of buy that Ripley is smart.
Mm-hmm.
They're not smart. They're poorly trained. They're not thinking. They're not taking the threat seriously enough. I still think they seem competent, but not competent at certain points. I want to know, whether they work for the government or not. I want to know how I'm supposed to feel about them, if they're just meatheads who kind of get what they deserve, or, is this a parody? I don't really know. I still don't like the nuclear reactor thing. I don't like the way this is done. But it is ultimately the Ripley going back in and, being approximately 800 times better than any Marine, and being, a
Mm.
ninja that, really jumps the shark and takes a salvageable, you know, actually, pretty decent movie, although I've got some objections to it, and turns it into, a movie that I is not very good.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I appreciate it. And I do think no, I agree.
I mean,
I think I do agree.
I love your version of the movie.
the first three acts I adore.
Mhm.
I think they work well. I've had in my head, and I think I've really sort of watching it this time. I've really focused in on what it's about, like how I relate to the characters. Hicks is the only one that's really competent to the extent, and even he fucks up. Like he uses the shotgun and blows the shit. He says like eat this, and it's all overly macho, and ends up getting um you know what's it,
Acid.
acid on
Yeah.
people and all this other stuff, right? So it's all fine. But Hicks takes charge. He listens to Ripley. That's the thing. Like you learn, she's the one we should take off, nuke it from orbit. It's the only way to be sure.
Hmm.
And Burke's like, well, I can't authorize that. Da, da. And she's like, well, technically, he's in charge. As
Hmm.
if it's a military operation. So if they are the government and the military, this is a military operation. Corporal Hicks is in charge, and even he refers to them as a bunch of grunts. And he's like, she's a
Hmm.
grunt. No offense. He's like, none taken. I think we take off and nuke it from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. Like he's the one going, we've been battered at this point. There is no alternative.
Yeah, that's a good scene.
Mm.
Unfortunately, it still plays into the Ripley is the only one who's smart, but at least,
Yes.
right.
Someone's
It's
trying
still
to
a good
work with
scene,
her.
and Hicks
Yeah.
is at least smart enough to recognize
Yeah. And at least with Hicks always seems to work on her level because she becomes emotional and he's the one like when Newt goes missing, he's the one going like, yeah. I hear what you're saying, but we've got aliens up our ass. We've got to keep moving.
Mhm.
Um, that sort of thing. So I think he becomes sort of on her level. But I think the pacing on this is great. I think the information layout is good. I'm fine with everything as I've laid it out. One of the things is sort of like when it comes to the final, let's say the final tipping point is after um Newt and Ripley have been attacked by the face huggers in the Medibay. And there's the whole thing, and then they shoot the window out. Hicks comes in, saves Ripley, and Hudson saves Newt and all sorts of stuff. And they know that it's been Burke, but and Ripley lays it out. And again, she's the smartest one in the room. She's now become the detective. She's like, no, this is how he was doing. He was going to impregnate us, take us back, to smuggle us through customs. And the only way he could have done this is if he killed you off in your um, hypersleep beds.
Yeah.
And everyone believes her and says, "Oh, you're
Yeah.
dog meat,
Right.
pal." And he's going like, You're all mad. Like, how do you, There's this is the point we're even on with Bert going like, "What? Yeah, this seems a bit, it's clearly the
Yeah.
case. It is the case, but
Right.
um, anyway, that the power goes out, and then they're getting this thing of like the boop boop boop, the sensors going off, and it's like they're coming, they're in the room, like they can't be 6 meters away. That's in the room. They're in the ceiling. Have
Yeah.
we missed
By the
something?
way, maybe check the drop ceiling.
Yeah,
Which by the way is like a grid. Like I mean, it's
yeah,
really obvious it's a drop ceiling. I mean, I've lived
yeah.
in houses with a drop ceiling. You would have thought of that, but okay.
Which seems really weird to have in something that has
Yes,
secure doors.
I
So I was,
know.
yeah,
like
you've got these big
we're
doors
gonna
going like,
spend all that money on the
oh,
door.
yeah,
Don't take a panel
oh,
off and climb above
yeah.
the door. Yeah, no, I know. It's
um,
not good.
does that not exist above the Medibay? Because it could Newt and Ripley got out that way? Don't know. Um, anyway, so that happens, but that's the moment, isn't it, when it all goes to shit and they're on the run, they're being
I
attacked.
agree.
And that's kind of like the tipping point where it's like, okay, we've now got to whittle everybody out. Vasquez has got to go, Gorman's got to go, Burke's got to go. We've now got to get it down to that, minimum kind of group,
The
and we
last
can
survivors.
and we can lose Newt, um, because and if I'm trying to think how it happens because it's Vasquez's fault.
Well,
This is what makes me laugh. We said about them being incompetent and the things they do. The reason that we lose Newt is that she's crossing a fan kind of rotating
oh my
device,
God, yes.
and she
It,
loses her footing because an explosions because Vasquez and Gorman both grab a grenade to take out some aliens as they're about to die because Vasquez has been acided on her foot. But the explosion is what sort of like knocks her off the thing and pushes her down the chute.
yeah, this is bad stuff. I mean, so I think the explosion actually, again, is kind of like dramatizing that the Marines, at least Vasquez and a few others, are actually some competent or noble or I
They
mean,
they
that's a
become this is their
solid sacrifice.
they've that become to me this becomes their journey. That's their character arc. They take this shit seriously. Like even Hudson at the
I
end like
like your
saves Newt
version of
and
this movie. I'm not convinced that's what I watched.
okay, that's in my head. That's what I saw. Like you know,
I think it kind of is. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it kind of can't decide if they're really parodic,
mm,
meathead idiots or, meatheads that also are kind of noble. Um, but definitely they can't know anything or be too competent because Ripley's got to be, the Mary
the
Sue.
main one. Yeah,
Yeah, the Newt having gone everywhere before her knowing these, like corridors the aliens can't get into or don't know, like I mean, okay, so she's a kid, like it kind of makes sense, not really, but this room with this turbine thing that she slips on, is pretty terrible. And then Ripley says, "I'm coming to save you." Um, I mean, if Newt just died, in that scene, and the explosion sent her into a spike on the wall, and she died. And the survivors evacuated. This would be a solid movie.
You're gonna like
To me.
Alien 3.
And I mean, I've seen it, but not for a long time. But yeah, then Ripley decides, having seen everybody die, I made a promise to Newt, and no man left behind. At least when it comes to Newt, everybody else, I was
Is a
totally
sacrifice.
content to
Yeah, expendable.
watch them die. Yeah.
Now I know that this, if you've watched the extended edition, this is obviously linking back to the fact that she lost her daughter and Newt is now fulfilling this role, and so I understand this whole mother thing that they've tried to do. And I think Ripley's good. They've tried to make her like she's competent and badass, but she's also caring and compassionate, and she's a mother. Fine, I get all that, and I'm comfortable with all that. But it does kind of feel this is where this ending feels. We talked about the dialogue feeling like dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Is it rote? This ending feels almost like, oh, this has got to happen for this to happen, to this to happen, to this to happen. Like it feels staged in a certain way.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. The separation feels staged. Like no, oh no, I slid down there, right? But a full-size person can't follow, right? I mean, that is very staged, very convenient. But also the whole, I've got to go. I'm going to go on my own and try to rescue her. Like take off if I don't get back in time. Is a total cliche, and it cannot work with Alien. I mean, you can do that with a lot of franchises, a lot of, like, I'm going to slip back behind enemy lines and fight the North Vietnamese. Okay. Maybe, you're great in the jungle. Okay. This cannot work with an alien hive. If it works with an alien hive, you've killed the franchise. The franchise is done. You have not understood anything about the aliens. They are weaker than the Vietnamese. Right? They're weaker than any human opponent ever in history outside of Cobra, in the cartoon show. I mean, I cannot express my contempt for this narrative decision. If you've built up the aliens as such badasses or, taken out the Colonial Marines, I know she's smarter, but here's where she becomes the ultimate ninja. And consequently, the aliens become a laughingstock.
The problem I have with you, this is where there are decisions that, like, we've seen these things en masse taking out the Colonial Marines. Now, again, one of the things that is not in the theatrical version that is in the extended edition that's kind of helps with this is that there's a set of drone guns that the Marines plant at certain places that and it's mentioned in the extended edition that they have taken out like loads of drone xenomorphs, right? So it makes a point of going like, we've culled the numbers, but the guns are running out of ammunition and we can't. So they've been sacrificing these drones. And they've obviously killed some. So by the end of the film, it's supposed to be a little clearer. Again, it's not in the dialogue. It's supposed to be a little clearer that Ripley going back in is not facing the horde that existed at the start of the film, right? But you're right, that is not there. That is not explained. More so, you actually see some of the aliens, so you see some of the xenomorph drones, and it's the Queen that tells them to back off because she's threatening the eggs. But we've also seen how fast they move. So, and they could climb up and get behind her, or they could do all kinds of things. So it does feel a little bit like they've neutered them for this, no pun intended. They've kind of sort of like, defanged them for this final scene in order for this sort of like, we've come to an agreement, the alien Queen and me, about what's going to happen here.
Yeah. Can I just, and you're right. It feels very sort of like set piece kind of, the movie conspiring. I mean, these are the moments that I hate most in cinema and writing. is where I feel the writer's hand come in
Yes.
and manipulate things, and and you know, then I end up feeling sympathy for the bad guys, because they've been manipulated by the cosmic jester. Yeah, so for me, this is incredibly painful. I also have to say, like, I mean, can you imagine what anyone who worked on that first Aliens, movie's reaction would be to this? I mean, you use the word drone, and I understand it makes sense that you introduce a queen, right? Those eggs have to come from somewhere, and you're using the ant or the queen bee kind of metaphor. Okay, I mean, look, that's always a mistake. Let's just that's always a mistake. They do it later with the Borg, mistake. It's always a mistake. But because it lets you personalize and have one big bad, right? They do it with the Daleks, right? It's Stavros, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of need to do this for narrative purposes, but it's almost always a mistake. It takes this faceless mob enemy
made
and
worse.
turns it into
Made worse by Prometheus and Covenant. That should be absolutely clear. But carry on.
Yeah, well, a lot is. I mean, the mythology certainly, but so the queen idea. I know why they do it. I'm not against doing it, but with the understanding that this is usually a mistake. And the reason why it's a mistake is it turns the rest into drones. And when you use that word drone, I just hate hearing that word, because that xenomorph in that first one is not a drone.
No.
It is a badass monster that is a killer in the darkness that lives in your nightmares, and you need to fear that like you fear the boogeyman at night. Kids need to fall asleep afraid of one of those things. And in this movie, they are drones. And I understand that logically they might have to be drones if you've introduced the alien queen, but they should never feel like drones. And certainly, I think when they're in the early scenes, with the reactor and all of that stuff, they don't feel like drones. I don't know why they down that spacecraft, because they seem intelligent. I like that we see that they're intelligent, but they're killing themselves there. I was a little annoyed. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in this plot that is kind of like mildly annoying, but you can kind of get past it. But for me, this climax is over the top, and this is the violence to the franchise that I've never been able to forgive.
Well, the thing is, it's going back in with the pulse rifle and the flamethrower, rescuing Newt, and then it keeps adding. This is the thing, isn't it? Because it feels like you say about the hand of the writer, the cosmic jester, as it were. You have this thing of like she's escaping, right? She's blown it all up. You know that the nuclear, you've had the arc lightning is sort of like going between things. One of my favorite effects of all time. I don't know why. I just find that really satisfying. Anyway, she gets up and you find that Bishop has left. And she's like, God damn you, Bishop. And, all that stuff. And then he turns back up and he's like, the platform was getting, he then explains it and says that the platform was getting too unstable. He had to circle round. All that feels like false stakes, where she grabs Newt and she's like, "Don't look, honey," because she thinks they're going to die, and then the drop ship sort of turns up and saves them. I've always hated that, because it feels like a cheap pop to be like, "Oh, we're gonna," I know that we get that Ripley's not going to die this way after everything. Like, don't try and prod me for one more. That's ridiculous.
Well, it's a cliche, right? I
Yeah.
mean, oh, where are they? Oh, and then the ship rises up, right? You do know you have eyes, right? You can look around the room and see if there's a ship hovering anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm not as bothered by that as you, ironically.
No,
but it is.
That bothers me. That's always been a sticking point for me. They get away.
And look, the queen is well designed. I like, I mean,
amazing. Yeah.
The flamethrower is okay. I mean, she sort of backs up. It's not done great, but I mean, like, I know the ideas they're doing here. But yeah, so she's escaped from the bowels, and she's made great time, by the way. I mean,
yes, 26 minutes. We've got plenty of time. 26 minutes. Um,
26 minutes is enough to go through the entire base, confront the queen, burn the eggs, make a big statement in a speech, grab Newt, get back,
yeah.
climb, Mount Everest to jump onto the top of the ship. Okay, right.
So yeah, but then they get back to the Sulaco. They get off, and they think it's all done, and you find out that it's not all done because Bishop's like explaining something or other, and then he goes, "Whoa!" and the tail comes through. He gets ripped in half, and we get the attack of the alien queen on the Sulaco. Um, and that's when she runs to get the loader. Whilst everybody's hiding, like Hicks is still on the
Mhm.
dropship, Newt's hiding under a platform under a grid that's being ripped up. She runs and gets the thing, and we get the now incredibly famous line, "Get away from her, you bitch," as she sort of revealed in the loader.
Will Shakespeare couldn't have delivered a better line.
That's true. And then she fights her. It feels very God. The thing is, one of the things that's funny about this, it feels very Godzilla to me watching it now. It's like I've seen Pacific Rim, I've seen Mechazilla, all this other stuff. It's a mech suit versus an alien queen. Um, it's fine, but like I don't know. Yeah, she falls into the space lock, the airlock, and the queen gets eventually blasted out into space. But it's one of those that when I was a kid and watched this, I was like, "This is awesome! This is the best bit of the film. This is amazing." I agree with you now. I watch it and I'm like, this does feel kind of clunky and slow and silly, and you know that loader doesn't feel like she's protected a great deal.
Yeah.
She has a roll cage, and that's about it.
Yeah, and you've got those like tail whips, and every time, Ripley, who's never exclaimed through this entire movie, she's been stoic,
Mm,
all of a sudden she goes, ah, ah, she's making these like faux orgasm kind of sounds as the tail, strikes her. And I mean, I'm okay with it, but I'm also, it feels like no, it's pretty easy to get a tail in between those bars and kill her.
yeah,
Um, and she falls. Ultimately, they fall into a hole that then has the airlock at the bottom of it. There's no protection in that loader, right? Like,
no,
uh,
actions must happen all the time.
yes.
Like
I
this
mean,
feels
no, if that
incredible.
loader falls, the person inside it is dead, right? I mean, it
Yeah,
gives them a decent strength, but oh, okay. So I'm I note these problems. What bothers me more, and I don't know what this says about my brain, but what bothers me more is like the engineering of that loader is designed to pick up things and move them slowly. So,
yes,
it's
it's a
got like a
forklift truck,
claw.
isn't it? It's a forklift.
Yeah, exactly. And it's got this claw and you see it, close down. That claw is around the queen's neck. Close down and
Yeah,
kill the queen. That's all you have to
yeah,
do. Instead, it just holds the queen and fights, and suddenly these limbs are moving rapidly. And it's like, no, they don't move rapidly. What they are designed to do is grasp, tons and tons and tons
mm.
with absolute, intense pressure, crush the queen. That's, you know, it's not an exos. It suddenly transforms into a very different kind of exos.
It becomes a battle
So
suit. I mean, that's the thing. It becomes like
exactly.
a battle suit, which is what they want. Um, yeah. So you do. What's funny about this film, and I realize this, and so I do agree. I think the fight with the Queen becomes a little silly. It becomes like an anime, almost like an anime kind of fight. What makes me laugh is I actually chuckled out loud this time watching it. Is how quickly after this has happened, it reaches its end. Like the Queen's
Mm.
blasted into space. She
Hmm.
closes the airlock. She crawls up. You know, destroyed Bishop says, not bad for a human as he's spitting up milk and stuff.
I like the bishop art.
Yeah,
I have to say, I like that last line. It's very RoboCop.
it is.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
and I do love that, like, this movie is smart enough to not have the artificial life form be the villain twice in a row, right?
But
That Bishop gets to redeem.
I'll put that in my final thoughts because there is
Okay.
I like the fact it teases it, like it makes you think several times that like it portrays, and Lance Hendrickson is very good in this film.
I agree.
But the next zoom is like they've like bandaged up Hicks, Bishop's in a bag in his hypercell, and Newt's all been cleaned, and she's there ready to go back into hypersleep, and she's like, and I shall sleep all the way home. And Ripley's like, yes. And then that's it. And that's the end of the film. And I'm like, hang on, have we not, how do we navigate this ship? There's not been like no discussion of like, is it going home? What's the problem? I don't understand this. Yes. So I did laugh at how quick they were like, we've done all the fun bits, end.
It feels like one of those 1930s endings,
Yes,
right? Where it's
yeah.
like King Kong's dead. Well, Beauty killed the beast.
End.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's remarkably fast, and this would be a great moment to maybe reflect on the corporation, or how this was all a trap, or how those colonial marines, weren't prepared for this, or how
She needs
I
to
was
have a conversation.
only able to rescue Newt because all the aliens were killed by those
There needs to be a conversation. To
bounties.
me, the thing this is missing is a conversation with Hicks.
Mm-hmm.
Like Hicks needs to be like, I've lost my entire team. We were not prepared. We need to make people aware that these things exist out there, and we need to be better prepared for this next time.
And fuck the corporation
And
that
fuck the
sent me in
corporation.
here,
Yeah,
for some guy's cheap advantage, right?
yeah, exactly. That it needs to be Hicks telling that, like, because the film starts once Ripley is found, is her saying this. One of these things ripped through my crew. We blew up the Nostromo. That was the right thing to do. Now, after this has happened, you need Hicks to be saying, I'm with you. We need a special unit that's designed, we need to take this information back. We need to let the people know that we don't know where these things are from. We don't know how far spread they are. There are other colonies out there. We need to be prepared for these things. And it
And
doesn't.
at least now we know there's a queen. These
We've
like
learned
we do know
information.
some stuff, but fuck the corporation.
Yeah,
Like we all
basically.
died. We were not ready for this.
It
No, you're
needs.
exactly right. And I almost forget that Newt is there. I always forget that Hicks survives. I always forget
Yeah,
that. Like I remember Newt. I mean, we'll get to what happens in the next one. But I mean, like I know that Newt gets into the cryogenic thing. I always forget that Hicks is even there,
yeah,
which tells you something, right?
yeah.
It's not a
Which
good
is a
sign.
shame because I think Hicks is great. I actually think I think Michael Biehn is really good in this film. Yeah, I'll quickly wrap up because there are a couple of things. You're right about Newt. I think Newt's a good character but becomes a MacGuffin that is wasted in the finale of this film. She's the one that survived the aliens for God knows how long. She should be a participant in the just the killing of the Queen. She should do something to help Ripley in some way. So that always bothers me. Because she's just being sucked. She ends up getting sucked across the floor, and Bishop grabs her and all that kind of stuff. So there's all that. The other thing, we haven't talked about Bishop. I wanted to sort of touch on because I think Newt becomes a bit of a sort of, like you say, she becomes a MacGuffin throughout the film. She starts off as an interesting sort of prospect and then becomes less and less important as the film goes on. Lance Hendrickson's Bishop he's a great choice. Obviously, Cameron worked with him as a sort of a character actor in Terminator. He was the original choice to play the Terminator, and obviously things all changed. But he's a weird looking dude, is Lance Hendrickson. Like he's not a good looking guy, but I love the way he looks. I think he's got a really good look. And there are several scenes in this where they play up the fact that he's an android or a synthetic person, as he likes to be called. And he does weird things. She obviously, Ripley doesn't trust him. But there's a scene later on where Spunkmeyer sort of is bringing all the equipment in, and Bishop's doing like a dissection of a face hugger. And he looks at me. He looks at Spunkmeyer, and then he's like, and Spunkmeyer's like, "Hello, Bishop. Can I get you anything?" and he just sort of says, "No, I'm good." And you're kind of like, he's a weird dude. Like this, you're not. Is he gonna go Ash? Is this gonna be another thing? Like,
Well, and in that scene, he says some line about how it's like fascinating,
it's
or
magnificent.
yes,
That's a crazy. He says magnificent, isn't it?
and that's clearly like
Mm,
Ash has the same response in the first one, and I found myself thinking about Prometheus and
yeah.
thinking like, okay, clearly in this universe, all synthetics just like have a religious awe for the aliens.
Well, there's a perfection. They all do, don't they? There's like a perfection to these creatures. Like they do what they are designed to do. That seems to be the droid thing. But I like that there's that uncertainty,
Hmm.
and then they give him the important job of bringing down the remotely bringing down the dropship, the second dropship. And so you are sort of like, is he going to do this? Is this a setup? Like, it doesn't feel. So you're always. I like the fact they do add in that level of mistrust for Bishop. Um, so that's kind of cool. It's not a big piece, but I like the fact that they do at least give it, a little bit of time.
I think the whole like going to get the dropship through that tube, like it feels like it's another complication that the movie doesn't need. Like, why do you have to, go through this tube and get the drop? I mean, it's
I
like,
can't believe he did
where
that.
is the
Did you see how
dropship
that's
already? Like,
that tube? When you
oh,
see him
I love it.
shuffling through, oh, it makes me feel so
I want to
claustrophobic.
do it. No,
Oh,
I'm like, oh, that reminds me of like spelunking, and I'm like,
oh
oh,
God.
I want to get in there.
I have a physical reaction when they shut that thing and he's sort of shuffling his way down. I have a physical reaction to that. It scares me. That does. Yeah.
No, yeah, I have the exact opposite reaction, and I'm like, I want to be the volunteer who gets to do that. I'll save everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we're stranded on, the
Yeah.
next
You're going.
LV planetoid, I'll volunteer for that. You can fight the queen.
That sounds fine. I'll be strapped into a loader, which is clearly just as good as any battle droid that's prepared.
Yeah, battle tech.
Yeah. Um. Yes. No. I think we sort of any final points. Anything else you want to sort of cover off with regards to aliens?
Well, this movie is a mess, and it's just really just a clusterfuck, in a lot of ways. I mean, unfortunately, it's got a lot that's working, right? And I think
Mm,
if it look, Newt has to die. You said like what has to happen, okay? There are certain things that, as a writer, you know that somebody's being false. And I can never forgive when somebody's being false.
hmm
And if you set up like the aliens as such a threat, they've eliminated the Marines and everything else, and Newt's lost into the belly of the beast, and then she's conveniently stolen by this alien underneath this grate in the water, who then the alien disappears, even though the aliens are all over. Why don't they attack? I mean, nothing makes any sense in this movie at that. But when a script is being false, and you set up this threat. Newt's been captured. You are not getting her back.
mm.
I mean, there's been other Marines that have been captured and entombed in the wall, right? And they say
Yes.
they're gone. Yeah, nobody's going back. It is wrong to go back to try to save them. But for Newt, because she's the main character's,
Surrogate
pet
child.
squeeze, right? Exactly. Then we get. I mean, this is just fundamentally the writers being false. You have to either follow through on what you've done, and Newt's going to die. Ripley's going to die going back to retrieve her. Maybe she gets to burn. You see the queen, she burns the queen, and Hicks and the android get off by themselves, and that's the end of the movie.
Mm.
Now, that's not going to sell to Hollywood, right? But that is how you have to end this movie according to your own principles. And for me, the falseness, I mean, there's a lot that I have little problems with that I think this movie could communicate better, but I do think it's smart. I do think, it almost has to follow through on that small first movie with a more action oriented movie to kind of take it in a different genre, take it in a different direction. There's a lot that is smart and is working here, but I can never forgive, I've got problems along the way with the Marines and Ripley and this and that or whatever, but they're not fatal. This is what's fatal to me.
Mm.
is, rescuing Newt and invalidating your entire story and all of the stakes that you've set up. I can forgive the loader even. I cannot forgive this. And
I think
I'm sorry. I mean, because
no,
there's a lot I
no, no,
like
no,
here,
no.
and I know people love this movie,
Yeah,
but
yeah. I'm one of them.
man,
But I acknowledge that sort of like one of the things I'd say is, and we'll see about this through 3 and 4. The alien universe is grim. Like it's a it's lived in gritty industrial universe. We've seen this. It's supposed to be, we've shown that it's sort of like it's corporate, it's political, it's hard. Like we've never seen Earth. You know what I mean? We've seen life on space stations and we've seen life on colonies is hard. All this stuff. It's a hopeless universe. Right? It keeps giving you, feeding you bits of hope, and then basically wants to keep pulling it away. Like, if you were to keep this idea that that Ripley has a child, all right, well, yeah, but she was 57 years in deep space in hypersleep. Like, it wants to keep pulling things away from you. So to have this kind of action focused savior finale I do think is a bit of a sort of a cliche and kind of sort of it gives in to the worst impulses. I also
mhm.
think you're right that my thing would be that they corner the alien queen and they all have to sacrifice themselves to, the nuclear explosion is going to go off. There's nothing they can do. They've got to keep it here. So, we'll stay and we'll get vaporized. And that's how it ends. But you're right, you couldn't sell that to Hollywood. Um, so I don't know. You're right. It feels I think this film works incredibly well. I love this film. I think there are really good bits to it. I think now I've deciphered and tapped into like the Marines and how they work and what they're there for and everything else. It kind of works better for me. Now we've sort of tapped into the idea of like the RoboCop kind of, idea or Verhoeven clearly watched this for both RoboCop and um
Starship Troopers.
Starship Troopers and was like, oh, I know where I'm going with my things. So yeah, I think it's all good. This finale does feel like a bit like an action fantasy. Um, and I think this is Cameron being Cameron. I think we see this. I think this need to do this action fantasy. I think is in all of his films. Beyond this, I think you could point it out in pretty much every film after this. I don't know about the Abyss. That's probably a slightly different way of taking things. But
I love Leonardo DiCaprio in the loader in the climax of the
yeah,
Titanic, personally.
but that's still
But it does
that's
have an action climax,
it
right? No,
does.
I mean, I forgot about all the gunfights on the Titanic.
Yeah, he pulls out a pulse rifle and he takes on the iceberg. But no, but the point
No,
is,
there really is. There's a gun chase. I mean, in fact,
yes,
that was one of the
exactly.
criticisms of the film at the time. Was like, yeah, I forgot about all the gunplay on the Titanic.
Yeah, what's it? Billy Zane tries to take him out with a
Yeah.
gun, and it has that, there is that sort of strong female character, and there's all this thing about again, living a life and blah blah blah, all this kind of stuff.
Another thing you got to survive. Another, dramatic
It's
moment.
in
Yeah.
it's in True Lies, it's in the Avatar films. Like this is the Cameron thing. Like we're gonna have a big actiony piece, but it's gonna be strong characters, and they're gonna kind of enter this sort of action fantasy of doing, you know, I mean, True Lies is fundamentally about that.
Right. Yeah.
For Jamie Lee Curtis character is about fulfilling the action spy fantasy and it becoming a reality by the end of the film. Like that's so
Hmm.
This is a Cameron thing.
Yeah, but at least that movie knows it, right? Like that movie
Yes.
uses the meta as the context, right?
Yes, 100%. And it's better for it because I love that film as
Hmm.
well. Um, but yeah, I don't know. You're right. I love this film. I do think it's a masterpiece. I think it's incredibly influential. I do think I think it hits so many notes and provides so much about the lore of Aliens that it kind of damages the rest of the franchise.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I don't think the Alien franchise has ever recovered from this film of how much it takes it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, a lot of the recent efforts have tried to go back more to the first one, right? To small scale. I mean, even Prometheus and Covenant. I mean, Covenant especially is,
The first part of Covenant, yeah, definitely.
yeah, and it's trying to return to this kind of like small scale, like how to do merge some of the big scale world building kind of mythology stuff with small scale threat. One alien is a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, look, there are things here. I love your take on the Colonial Marines. I think, and your take on the plot. I mean, I think that is the take that makes sense of this. I think you're right. There are a lot of hints. I feel like I know this movie better for having talked to you about it. I like a lot of the stuff it's kind of trying to do, more than again, if the last 30 minutes were lost to history and this were like a lost movie, the real film has been lost or something, the last two reels, I'd say, God, what would have been in that? Like it would be so fascinating, but yeah, it seems so. You're right. It's like it's very Cameron. It's very action. It's very just kind of give the audience what it wants, but it does not even occur in the same universe as the rest of the movie.
No, I agree. And I think that's the problem. But I think these. I'll finish on this point because it made me think about it watching this. And I've always had this thing in my head. The three sort of big sci-fi horror franchises, right? Sci-fi action horror franchises: Alien, Predator, Terminator. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Those first three films, right, are low scale slasher films. They are horror films, right? Predator, the first Predator, is a slasher film. It's a group of people taken out by a killer, right? And it ends with a sort of like your final girl being Arnie dressed in mud. But the same goes for like the Terminator. The Terminator is a chase film. It's a low budget, noir thriller, right?
Mm-hmm.
Alien is a haunted house thing with a monster in it. Like that's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what keeps it cool. When you think of the slasher genre, like the Halloween, Friday the 13th, Chucky, or Child's Play, all those ones, you can repeat the formula. You've expected to repeat the formula, right? Here's the villain because we want to come see the kills, right? We like Freddy, we like Jason, we like Chucky. Set up the people they're going to kill, put them in a situation, off you go, right?
All
That's
you
the
need for
point.
a sequel is to kill them a little more inventively
Yeah,
or bloodily. Yeah.
exactly. Do something different, yeah, but we want there's a formula, right? We want to
Mm-hmm.
see those things, or we want to see that the hero character is the villain in those situations. We want to see Michael Myers, we want to see Chucky, so on and so forth. The problem that these franchises face is you can't keep doing that. Because if you were like, a predator turns up and kills another unit of people, like you'd be like, yeah, I'm bored of that. I've seen that. Like they want to expand the lore of these creatures because it's a sci-fi universe. Or where are they from? How are they? What's the culture on the predator planet? Like, what does it do? Aliens. Where do they come from? Oh, they come from a queen. Okay, well, where does that come from? How's that created? The Terminator. Okay, well, if there's well, no, we're gonna what are there only T-800s? What about the other two? We're gonna create a T-1000. Oh well, now you've got to up the ante. And you have a TX, and then you're gonna have this, and you're gonna have that. The problem with these franchises is once you start to build in lore, each film tries to do something different, and it
Mm-hmm.
starts to fail. I mean, look at T3 compared to T2. Like T3 is literally they're trying to do the same film, but they're like, but it's a woman Terminator this time, the TX. And you're like, yeah, but it's kind of shit. Like the film is
Yeah.
kind of shit. They really struggle once you hit a certain point with these franchises and you establish the law, you're kind of done.
Yeah. I
Unless,
mean,
do you know what I mean?
unless you just keep going back to the original
Mm-hmm.
sort of
Mm-hmm.
slasher formula. Um, yeah, and I think all of these, the second film, right, tries to go big, right? Um, and the third film tries to complete
Recalibrate.
a trilogy, right? In some way. but the second film's, I mean, it's really only Terminator that succeeds. You know,
Weirdly,
um,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, and Aliens succeeds to an extent, right? But does violence to the central conceit, right?
Hmm.
Um, I mean, to me, I love big bads. I mean, I love the Daleks. I love, like anything that is. I love the Borg. I mean, I love anything that is depicted as an unstoppable threat and creates a kind of existential dilemma for the humans involved of like, who do we sacrifice? Is human civilization worth saving? If we do save ourselves, are we going to have to compromise our values, or kill tons of people, or just have to really just become something terrible in order to survive? Is that worth it? How do we judge human life versus their life? How do we understand fundamentally a Darwinian universe that would have aliens or predators,
Mm.
or I mean, we're used to being the top of the food chain. When we're not, suddenly it doesn't seem fair any longer.
Yeah.
Those are all big ideas. I love those ideas, and I'm always disappointed. Like, it's easy to do the first movie. It's easy to do that first story of just the
Yes.
unstoppable foe that you've got lucky, and through some combination of luck and hard work, you managed to eke out a victory. But the entire point is this will not be repeated a whole ton of times, right?
Hmm.
So you can up the ante, but you know, there's only so long you can play that story out without having to have the bad guys win.
Mm.
Um, and I think you just have to have a certain amount of courage as a writer to realize that if you ever let go of them being the unstoppable, threat, you've lost the key thing that makes this successful as a franchise.
Yeah.
When Dracula becomes comic, you know, you're done,
Yeah.
right? So to me, it's shocking how much this second one jumps the shark, and it's just like, right, we're gonna skip to the sixth movie.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I think that's the case. I mean, I think about, with the Predator franchise is the one I'd say Terminator tries to follow a law and does its own thing and then becomes an absolute convoluted shit show. But with the Predators, they did exactly that. Like, you have Predator 2 and they're like, yeah, but now we're going to do it in the city, like the concrete jungle, and I'm like, cool. Actually, I am unabashedly a fan of Predator 2. Like, it's stupid, but I love it. And then they were like, okay, we don't know what to do now. We've done the jungle and we've done the city. What do we do? Oh, we're going to do, like, it took long enough, but we're going to do predators and we're going to introduce super predators. And you're like, no, 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 no. We don't need super predators. The predators from the first two film were the super predators. Like, that's the point. Stop upping the ante. And then you have The Predator, which is a god awful film, which is then like, oh, now we're going to introduce an even bigger predator that everyone is scared of. And they're now going to introduce genetic manipulation. And that's why they do hunting. And you're just like, stop. Stop trying to create this backstory. It's not needed. And then they did Prey, which
mm,
I have
mhm,
problems with. I think has some real issues in places, but it's a straightforward Predator movie again. Where they're like,
mhm,
yeah, we're going to go back 350 years. What would have happened with a less advanced Predator versus, in Native American tribes? And you go, oh, that's an interesting idea. The fact that the response to that was like, people were like, cool, now I want to see this in Edo, Japan.
mhm.
Like
Sure,
now I want to
I
see
feel the
this.
same way.
Yeah, now I want to
Yeah,
see this in the Caribbean with pirates, and you're just like, yeah, that's a cool idea. Like, what's funny is the comics had already done this, where the comics are
I
like,
know.
we did this in the '90s. Can we be, can we be thanked? So you're right. But I think Alien is the same. Like, the comics did it again, didn't they? They were like, we're gonna have a story where it's gonna be, we're going to have the Colonial Marines subset of comics, but we're also going to drop in every now and then a series where it's going to be, oh, but
Well,
aliens on a freighter or alien on a or whatever, and it's going to be the thing. But
and the comics did a sequel to this film,
they did,
and had Newt revived, and did it right. And it seems to me that I mean, I would make some modifications to this film, but especially to that final act. But it seems to me that talking about franchises and how they evolve, the key problem, the key threat of Alien is that one of these is so deadly that if one of these gets on Earth, humanity is basically dead.
Mm.
And they kind of allude to that, in the first one, and more explicitly in the second one. Okay, I have problems with the second one, but clearly that's where you're going, right? Like, you are not going to defeat these aliens. You can contain the infection, but if that infection ever gets to Earth, Earth seems to be the only place where humans can breathe well and not live. It's probably still a dystopia, a corporate dystopia, but it's probably a lot better than living on one of these mining facilities. Obviously, that's where this franchise is going, right? Like, what has to happen is, you can fight the aliens off, you can defeat them in movie after movie, but at some point, one is going to get back to Earth, either because Weyland-Yutani seems totally intent on bringing them back, but that's basically going to be the demise of the human race.
And that's what happens.
Or at least,
I mean, that's
right.
in the books they do that. Genocide,
Right.
Red Harvest, and I forgot what they're called now. But there's a whole
They did it in the comics too.
Yeah, well, they replicated the books, didn't they? There's a whole extended universe, Star Wars style, that tells a whole thing about the collapse of Earth and how it's taken over by aliens, by the Xenomorphs. So, yeah, it's the right way to go. The fact that everyone else was like, "That's what we're going to do," and the films went, no. One thing I'll throw in is we talked about the slasher films, and you've identified that you're follow character. I'm not going to say perspective character, or your antagonist or protagonist. You are following from film to film certain people, right? You pick a thing. Even in the Scream franchise, like the killer will change every film, but you're going to follow like Nev Campbell's character, right? You have a character that you anchor yourself to. The problem with these things is they weren't sure that they're like, okay, who is the draw? Whose story is this? And so the first three films become Ripley's story, or the first four. We'll talk about the fourth one, but they become Sigourney Weaver. This is Sigourney Weaver's initial franchise, right? This was her doing her thing. The fact that they wanted Arnie back for Predator 2, and he was like, "No, thank you. I've only really done one sequel. I don't really intend to. James Cameron can get me back for a sequel. Like, you can't." And the same with like the even beyond that, like Terminator is anchored by Arnie, but it's the wrong, I think the wrong thing, which is when I think, when they moved to Salvation was the right decision, poor execution. I think it's the same with this. Anchoring it to Ripley becomes a problem.
I agree. Absolutely. Yeah, and just like those slasher films, right? You're really coming to see the murders,
Yes.
right? Jason's really the hero, right? I mean, like, the alien is really the hero, and you want your moral. I mean, it's just like every monster movie ever, right? You want your moral shielding by being able to say, okay, the good guys won. The white Christian defeated Frankenstein or Dracula or whatever, right? But what I'm really here for is Dracula killing people. The alien is the money shot, right? The alien is what you come to see. And I want to see, just give me grisly murders on spaceships with, beautiful photography of nightmarish aliens and inventive ways of killing people. And I'm pretty sold.
So
I agree with you. Ripley being the superhero protagonist is
a problem.
A bad choice. Yeah.
Well, so we'll see what you think of the next one, because obviously the next episode we're going to be talking about Alien 3, which came in the early 90s, like 93, 94, I can't remember now. Maybe even earlier than that, actually, by David Fincher, who was desperate to take his name off it. Again, there are two versions of the film. There is the theatrical version and the extended cut, or the director's cut.
92, by the way.
92. Wow. Okay. So I would say in this case, I do prefer, I think, the director's cut. I'm going to watch one, see what I think of it. I have a hot take on this. I actually really like Alien 3. But we'll see, does it stand up? It's been several years since I've watched it. I probably haven't watched it for like 5-6 years, but I have good memories of it. I'll be fascinated to see what you think when we get back to, is this a recalibration of what the franchise should be.
I'm
Anyway,
looking forward to it.
any final thoughts?
Well, this has
Anything
been
else to
good.
rip on?
No, I mean, this has been good. Thank you for tolerating my hot takes, and thank you for. I do think that you have the best coherent explanation for these things. I don't think that they're huge problems, but I do think that if they were underlined better, if that, with the explosion, and all of this stuff, the Colonial,
Yeah,
it would be a better movie.
it could be a little tighter, is what we're saying. I think, yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. Okay, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a little interlude. Obviously, we're running up to Alien Romulus, so that'll be an interesting sort of debate after the back of these films. But for now, I hope you enjoyed. Go back. We've been doing our post-apocalyptic series. This is our little interlude. Go check, and if you think if we've got hot takes on this, go check out what we're going to talk about on those. We've covered the Mad Max franchise, and we've done a bunch of other films, sort of, that you may not have heard of, but you should definitely check out. And also, we've done it on the Patreon. We've done a series of sort of post-apocalyptic films. We did The Day After on the main feed. We did Threads on the Patreon most recently. We've also done The Last Battle, and we did I Am Legend, and we've done a bunch of others as well. So go check those out on our Patreon, links down below, because more hours of us sort of debating these films, as well as doing sort of like trekking through the Twilight Zone and me doing my 30-minute thoughts. So anyway,
tons of stuff on there, and if
loads
you
of, yeah,
when we're talking about Amanda Ripley, her daughter, she is the protagonist of Alien Isolation,
yes,
animated movie that we'll be talking about on the Patreon.
yes. So we'll be covering that as well. So yeah, go check that out. There might even be some little drops coming your way of sort of examples of those things on the main feed, just as little examples. Give you a taster, maybe tease you over there some more. Anyway, for now, Julian, thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.
Enjoy this, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we shall see you on the next episode.